This is Mr. Kennedy, and today we're examining a phenomenon that most people in your life will never have the intellectual honesty to acknowledge, something I call the peace paradox. It's the precise moment a man stops chasing the noise, the status, the validation, the performance of success, and discovers that the silence he was running from his entire life was actually the destination. We're going to dissect why the highest value men on the planet, men with options, resources, and the kind of freedom most people only fantasize about, are voluntarily stepping back from the visible game. Smaller lives, quieter days, less drama, less performance, and paradoxically, more power than they've ever held. This is not a video about giving up. This is not a video about failure or retreat. This is a cost-benefit analysis of the most underreported shift happening in modern male psychology right now. The men who built the careers, accumulated the wealth, played every game society handed them, and then, at the height of their power, chose silence over spectacle. Society doesn't know what to do with these men, because a man who can't be motivated by status, can't be seduced by validation, and can't be controlled by the fear of judgment is a man the system has no lever to pull, and that terrifies everyone who depends on male compliance to function. Stay with me. This goes deeper than you think. Before we dissect the mechanics, let me tell you why I'm personally invested in this conversation, because I've lived the exact trajectory we're going to examine today, not as an observer, but as a participant. I spent the better part of a decade building the visible life, the kind of life that photographs well, the kind of life you narrate at dinner parties and watch people's eyes widen. I understood the game. I played it deliberately, and for a period of time, I won by every external metric the game offers. And then I ran the actual numbers, not the income numbers, not the asset numbers, the real numbers, the cost in hours, the cost in mental bandwidth, the cost in peace, the cost in autonomy, the ability to make decisions based on what I actually want versus what I need to maintain the infrastructure of the image I'd constructed. The math didn't close, not even close. What I had built was a high-maintenance machine that required constant fuel, financial, emotional, psychological, just to stay running. And the return on that investment, measured in actual daily quality of life, in genuine peace, in the simple ability to sit in a room and feel like enough without performing anything for anyone, that return was negative. So I made a choice that confused everyone around me. I started dismantling it, deliberately, methodically, not out of failure, not out of defeat, but out of a cold, clear-eyed analysis that the complexity wasn't paying what it promised. And what I discovered on the other side of that dismantling is what we're examining today: the peace paradox, the counterintuitive reality that the less you have to prove, the more power you actually hold. That silence, chosen deliberately by a man with options, is not weakness. It is the most sophisticated power move available. If you're here expecting me to validate the hustle narrative, to tell you that more is always more, that status equals fulfillment, that the louder your life, the better, you're in the wrong place. This channel exists to deliver the analysis nobody else is willing to run. Stay with me. Let's start at the beginning. Let's examine the script every man in the modern world is handed before he's old enough to question it. Work hard, harder than the man next to you. Build wealth, visible wealth. Buy the house, not the modest house, the impressive house. Drive the car that signals arrival. Wear the watch that communicates net worth without a word. Collect the titles, the square footage, the social proof. And at every stage of this accumulation, perform it. Make sure it's seen. Make sure it registers. Because the entire value of status is its visibility. Status that no one observes generates no social return. Society packaged this script as masculinity, as responsibility, as the definition of a man, providing, building, achieving. And millions of men, intelligent, capable, hard-working men, took that script and executed it faithfully. They sacrificed their 20s to it, their 30s, their health, their time, their peace. They deferred everything that actually mattered: rest, relationships they chose freely, time spent on things with no economic return, in service of this script. And then something happened that the script never accounted for. They arrived. They reached the destination, the income bracket, the square footage, the title, the visible markers of success that were supposed to signal completion, fulfillment, arrival. And standing at that destination, after everything it cost to get there, they felt something the script had never prepared them for. Nothing. Not euphoria, not fulfillment, not the deep, settled satisfaction of a man who has built something that matters. Just the quiet, disorienting realization that the destination was a fiction, that the fulfillment was always supposed to be one more level away, that the game had no ending, only new levels, new metrics, new benchmarks, all of them promising the same payoff that none of them ever delivered. This is not a personal failure. This is not a character flaw. This is the hedonic treadmill operating exactly as designed. The psychological mechanism by which human beings adapt rapidly to positive changes in circumstance, returning to a baseline level of satisfaction regardless of what they acquire or achieve. You buy the car, you're excited for 2 weeks, then it's just your car. So you need the next thing, the bigger house, the better watch, the upgraded title. Each acquisition promising the emotional return the last one failed to deliver. The treadmill never stops, it just gets faster. High-value men are recognizing this, and their response is not to run faster. Their response is to step off entirely. Let's break down the mechanics of why that decision is rational, why it works, and why the men who've made it describe it as the most significant shift of their adult lives. Every possession you own owns you back. This is not philosophy. This is a practical, measurable reality. The large house requires maintenance, property taxes, utilities scaled to square footage, repairs that arrive without warning and leave without apology. It anchors you geographically. You cannot leave easily. You cannot adapt quickly. You are tethered to a location by the weight of what you own there. It requires a specific income floor just to maintain without degradation. The moment your income drops below that floor, the house stops being a symbol of success and becomes a source of panic. The luxury vehicle requires premium fuel, premium insurance, premium repairs at premium dealerships. It depreciates from the moment you take possession while costing you continuously. It generates anxiety about parking, about damage, about the gap between what it costs and what it's worth as it ages. It communicates status to strangers whose opinions, if you examine this honestly, have zero bearing on the quality of your actual life. The expansive social calendar, the dinners, the events, the networking, the performance of a man who is connected and relevant and in demand requires enormous ongoing investment of the one resource that is genuinely finite and genuinely non-renewable, your time. Every complexity you add to your life adds an ongoing tax, financial, temporal, psychological. The aggregate of these taxes across a high-complexity lifestyle is staggering. Most men who are living inside that complexity have never actually calculated it. They're too busy running to stop and count what the running costs. High-value men are running that calculation, and when they run it honestly, the conclusion is consistent. The complexity isn't paying what it costs. Now let's examine the status game's structural flaw, because this is where most men get trapped without ever understanding the mechanism that's holding them. The status game is seductive because it's measurable. You can compare houses, cars, incomes, titles. There are clear metrics, clear winners and losers at any given snapshot in time. And human beings, by evolutionary design, are deeply responsive to relative social standing. But the status game has a structural flaw that makes it unwinnable by design. It's relative and infinite. You acquire the $100,000 vehicle and feel the satisfaction of arrival, briefly, until you encounter the $200,000 vehicle. You purchase the 4-bedroom house and feel accomplished until you're at a dinner party in a 6-bedroom house. The goalposts are not fixed. They move automatically in response to your position. Every time you reach a benchmark, the benchmark advances. Winning requires not just achievement, but continuous, escalating achievement. The moment you pause, someone else advances past you, and your position degrades. There is no maintenance mode in the status game. You are either climbing or falling, and climbing indefinitely at the pace required to maintain a position of visible superiority is not compatible with peace. It is not compatible with health. It is not compatible with a life that feels, on a Tuesday afternoon when no one is watching, like it's actually worth living. The only rational response to a game with no winning condition is to examine whether playing is actually in your interest. The highest value men have examined this. Their answer is consistent. It isn't. Here is a distinction that most men are never taught, and that the consumer economy depends on them never learning. The difference between visible wealth and invisible wealth. Visible wealth is the large house, the premium vehicle, the designer markers of financial arrival. It communicates status. It's the language of the social performance, and it costs, continuously and substantially, to maintain. It ties you to income requirements. It creates financial vulnerability. The gap between what your lifestyle costs and what genuine security would require is often enormous for men playing the visible wealth game aggressively. Invisible wealth is different in every dimension. The paid-off, modest home, the reliable, owned outright vehicle, the investment portfolio built slowly over years of not spending money on visible wealth. wealth, the absence of debt, the emergency fund that means a bad month is an inconvenience, not a crisis, the savings that mean a bad year is survivable without panic. Invisible wealth doesn't signal anything to anyone. It doesn't photograph well. It doesn't generate status in social contexts. A man with invisible wealth and a man with none can walk into the same room and be indistinguishable by the metrics the status game uses to rank participants. But invisible wealth generates something visible wealth cannot: genuine options. The man with invisible wealth can walk away from the job that's destroying his peace because his expenses are low and his reserves are deep. He can take 6 months to work on something that matters to him because he doesn't need to service a complex lifestyle. He can make decisions based on what he actually values because financial necessity is not holding a gun to his head. Visible wealth is the appearance of power. Invisible wealth is actual power. And high-value men, once they understand this distinction, realign their behavior accordingly. Now, the final mechanism, and this one is the one that makes everything else click into place. Money is renewable. You can lose money and make more. Careers can be rebuilt. Businesses can be restarted. Financial setbacks, while painful, are recoverable. Time is not renewable, not 1 second of it. Every hour you spend maintaining a lifestyle you don't genuinely need, performing for an audience whose opinion of you has no measurable impact on your actual happiness, chasing benchmarks that will not deliver the return they promise, that hour is permanently gone. There is no recovery mechanism. There is no reinvestment strategy that gets it back. High-value men who have internalized this asymmetry become ruthless about time allocation in a way that looks, from the outside, like disengagement or apathy. It isn't. It's precision. It's the behavior of a man who has correctly identified his most valuable and irreplaceable resource and has decided to stop squandering it on inputs with negative returns. They ask a single, brutal question about every demand on their time. Is this worth the hours of my finite life it costs? And increasingly, the answer to that question, when applied to the high-complexity, high-performance, high-visibility lifestyle the status game requires, is no. Now let's examine something that most channels won't touch with honesty. Why does mainstream culture, the media, the social narrative, the voices of conventional wisdom, actively pathologize the man who makes this choice? Because a man who can't be motivated by status is a man the economic system cannot monetize. The entire architecture of consumer capitalism is built on one foundational assumption: that men will spend money to signal status, and that the desire for status is inexhaustible. The automotive industry, the housing market, the fashion industry, the luxury goods sector, the hospitality industry built around the performance of affluence. All of it depends on men who are in the game, who care about winning it, who will exchange real resources for the social signal that visible consumption sends. A man who has exited the status game is an economic ghost. He had the income, he had the access, he chose not to participate, and he cannot be lured back in because the mechanism the system uses to lure, the promise of status, of social elevation, of the validation that comes from visible success, no longer has traction on him. He's not afraid of missing out on what the status game offers. He's already run the analysis on what it actually delivers. But it goes deeper than economics. The social dynamics of the modern dating market depend structurally on male competition. The conventional arrangement requires men competing for female selection through status display, through resource accumulation, through the visible performance of provider capacity. This competition generates the leverage that makes certain relationship structures possible. When men compete, women select. The power dynamic flows from that competition. When high-value men exit the competition, not because they can't compete, but because they've assessed the terms of the game and determined that winning isn't worth what it costs, the dynamic breaks down. The leverage shifts. Men who had been competing disappear from the market, and the men who remain are, by selection, either men who haven't run the analysis yet or men who don't have the option to exit. This is not a theoretical observation. The data on marriage rates, on men's engagement with traditional relationship structures, on the demographic of men who are choosing relationship minimalism, the data is unambiguous and the trend line is steep. The response from mainstream culture is predictable and consistent. Pathologize it. Frame the men making this choice as failures, as emotionally stunted, as refusing to grow up, as afraid of intimacy, as damaged. Apply whatever diagnostic label generates enough social shame to pull them back into the game. It isn't working because the men who've made the peace paradox calculation aren't operating on social shame as a motivator. They're operating on analysis, and no amount of narrative pressure changes changes the underlying math. What the peace paradox ultimately requires is the construction of a psychological concept that consumer culture has spent decades systematically dismantling: enough. Consumer culture cannot function in the presence of enough. The entire engine depends on a perpetual state of insufficiency, the deep, uncomfortable feeling that what you have isn't adequate, that what you are isn't adequate, that the gap between your current state and the state that would finally generate the feeling of completion requires exactly what the next purchase, the next achievement, the next acquisition promises to deliver. The man who has genuinely internalized the concept of enough, who has defined for himself, independent of external benchmarks, what sufficiency looks like, and has built his life to reach and maintain that level, is a man who has permanently exited the engine. He doesn't need the next level of house because the house he has is enough. He doesn't need the status vehicle because his transportation is functional and sufficient. He doesn't need the escalating social proof because his internal sense of his own value doesn't require external confirmation to remain stable. This is not complacency. Complacency is the absence of standards. This is sovereignty, the establishment of personal standards derived from genuine self-knowledge rather than competitive benchmarking against other men who are themselves operating from the same externally imposed script. Building the psychology of enough requires three components. First, honest self-knowledge, an accurate understanding of what you actually need, not what you've been conditioned to want, not what signals the right things to the right audiences, but what genuinely contributes to your daily quality of life, your health, your peace, your sense of purpose. Second, the willingness to defend that definition against constant external pressure, because once you've defined enough and started living accordingly, the social system will push back. The people still in the game will frame your choices as failure, as settling, as giving up. You will need a stable enough internal foundation to hear that narrative and dismiss it without instability. Third, the discipline to stop at enough. Not because you can't go further, because you've decided that further isn't the direction you're going, that the additional cost of the next level, in time, in complexity, in the peace you'd have to surrender to maintain it, isn't a trade you're willing to make. The men who've built this psychology describe a specific experience consistently, a settled quality of daily life that was entirely absent during the pursuit phase. Not excitement. Excitement is the feeling of chasing, not triumph. Triumph is temporary and requires constant renewal, something quieter, more durable. The feeling of a man who knows exactly where he is, exactly what he has, exactly what he values, and requires nothing from the outside world to confirm that he's enough. That feeling has a name: peace. I've been on both sides of this equation. I've played the status game at a level most men never reach, and I've made the deliberate choice to step back from it in ways that confused and concerned people who cared about me. Both experiences have given me data. The status game delivers what it promises for brief, diminishing intervals: the excitement of acquisition, the satisfaction of visible achievement, the social recognition that comes from winning rounds in the competition. These are real. They're just temporary. They're just relative, and they cost substantially more in time, in peace, in autonomy than they return. The peace paradox delivers something different, not the spike of acquisition, but the steady, low-frequency hum of a life that costs less than it returns, less noise, less performance, less proving, and in the space that the performance used to occupy, genuine clarity, the ability to think without the cognitive load of maintaining a complex self-presentation, the ability to act on actual values rather than strategic positioning, the ability to wake up on an unremarkable morning and find that the morning is, without any external event to justify it, simply good. That's the paradox. The less you have to prove, the more power you hold. Not the power of dominance, the power of independence. The power of a man who has no lever available to him that the system can pull, who cannot be motivated by status because he's exited the status competition, who cannot be controlled by the fear of judgment because his sense of value doesn't depend on external confirmation, who cannot be trapped by financial necessity because he's built his life lean enough that necessity has very limited reach. This channel exists because I got tired of watching capable men sacrifice everything that actually mattered in pursuit of goals that were never going to deliver what they promised. Men spending the best decades of their lives building visible monuments to worth they never actually doubted, for audiences whose validation they never actually needed, at a cost in time and peace and health that can never be recovered. You don't need more to be valuable. You don't need to perform more to be enough. You don't need to win the status game to have lived well. You need clarity about what you actually value. You need the discipline to build toward that and stop there. You need the psychological stability to hold that position when the culture tells you it isn't enough. If this analysis landed, if something in this resonated with a calculation you've been running but haven't been able to articulate, drop a comment. Tell me where you are in this. Have you stepped off the treadmill? Are you still on it but starting to feel the cost? Are you running the numbers for the first time right now? The conversation in the comments matters. Men sharing honest data points about their own experience is how this information spreads to the men who need it. Subscribe if you want more analysis without the sugarcoating. This channel will never tell you that more is always more. It will never frame your worth as dependent on what you've accumulated or what you can prove. It will always run the actual numbers, even when the numbers are uncomfortable. The peace paradox is real. The less you have to prove, the more power you actually hold. Not the power anyone else can see, the only power that actually matters. Stay healthy.